Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss about observer design pattern in Java. What's the intent? The intent of observer design pattern is it defines a one-to-many dependency between objects so that when one object state changes, all its dependents are notified and updated automatically. For example, we have an YouTube channel and many subscribers subscribing to an YouTube channel, and just assume all the users who are subscribing to the channel gets notification if something is new is posted on the channel. So then that will best describe the one-to-many dependency between objects. So when something is posted on the channel, all the users are notified about the update. So what are the problems solved using the pattern? How to define a one-to-many dependency between objects without making the objects tightly coupled? Well, what is tightly coupled? Tightly coupled is objects are said to be tightly coupled when one object depends on different other objects. And objects are said to be loosely coupled if there is only a minimal dependency on the other objects. So the other problem solved using this pattern will be how to create a model to update all the dependent objects when the state of one object changes. So these are the two problems this pattern is going to solve. First, let us see the layman approach. Here we have class subject that updates the dependent objects observer1 and observer2. This makes it impossible for the subject to change independently, right? As the subject needs to be updated for each addition or removal of the observer. So we can say this is an inflexible way to define one-to-many dependency between objects as the objects here are tightly coupled. Now let us see a better approach. The idea of the observer pattern is simple. It is to establish a flexible notification registration interaction by notifying all the registered observers automatically when an event of interest occurs. Let us see the architecture. We have two interfaces in the pattern, subject and observer. Let us see the methods to be defined in the subject. Register is to register the observer. So subject can be actually considered as a channel in our example, and observer can be the user who is subscribing to the channel, right? So first method will be register, where it is used to register the observer. Unregister is used to unregister the observer. Notify observers is a method which will update if there is any message or update in the channel, so that updates all the observers registered. And get update is a method which will be used by the observer to get the latest update and be in sync with the subject. And finally, we'll have the post message method in subject, so which actually is used to post a message. And coming to the interface of the observer, we have an update method which will be used by the observer to get the update from the subject. And we have the update, another method here. We have used method overloading, so we can see which takes the string as the parameter. So this method will be used by the subject to post the update to all the registered observers. And we have set subject, which will be used to attach the subject to the current observer, right? So these are the two interfaces we'll be having in this pattern. Now let us see the classes which implements these interfaces. Let's first see the subject class, right? Which is implementing the subject interface. So we are going to have a message of string object, and we'll be having another data member as observers. So list of observers for registering the observers, right? And let's see the class which actually implements the observer interface. We can see here we have an observer name of string object, and subject registered will be used to actually register the subject for the observer, right? So this is all what it is about the architecture of observer design pattern. Now let us write the code for this pattern. Let us first define an interface. I'll name my interface as subject. We have 5 methods, right? So first method will be to register the observers. Register observer. Unregister the observer. Unregister the observer. to unregister the observer, we have unregister method, and we don't want this method from the Java util package. This is our own user defined interface, right? Void notify observers is another method which is used to notify all the observers about the update, the observers who have registered to the subject. And we have get update method. And finally, we have post message, which actually takes string as the parameter. This is one interface of subject, right? Now let us define observer interface. Observer. Here we have three methods. We have update, another update method which takes string as the parameter, and we'll have set subject. To associate the subject to the observer, right? So we have two interfaces defined now. Now we need to define two classes to actually implement these interfaces. So first, let's implement the subject interface. I'll name my class as subject implementation, which implements the subject interface. We need to implement all the methods which are actually declared in the subject interface, right? So let's define them now. And before that, we need to have two data members for the subject class, right? So let's have those. We need to have list of observers, where we'll call the object name as observers list. And we need to have a string message, right? Now let's actually define register method. So register method, what we need to do, and before that, actually we have the observers list, right? So let's have a constructor where we'll instantiate our array list, observers list, right? Observer list, we'll instantiate it to array list. And then we'll start defining the methods in the interface subject. So first register, right? So let's actually register the observer. How do we do that? We have the list, right? Observer list dot, we are going to use the method add in the list and add the observer, right? And what about if observer is null? So let's handle that case as well. If my observer is gonna be null, then let's handle it by throwing the null pointer exception, right? So this completes the register method. Now, how do we unregister the observer? Will you take the list and remove the observer using the remove method. And again, we need to handle the null pointer case, right? So let's handle this case as well. If my observer is null, which is not present in the observer, and if I wanted to remove, I'll get the null pointer exception, right? So we'll just handle that case here, right? And then how to notify the all observers who are registered. So for that, what we can do is for each observer from the observers list, what we want to do? We want to call the update method of the observer. So observer dot update, and we'll pass the message. We are going to define the message like so. In the post message, we'll actually pass the message, right? So this completes the notify observers. And again, let's actually handle the null case for observers list. So what if my list is empty or null, right? So let's actually handle that case as well. This has to be not null, and observer list should not be empty as well. Only then we are going to call this loop. We are actually will invoke this loop, right? Or else what we'll do? So we need to put this in this loop. we'll just say there are no observers. If my observer list is empty or if it is null, then we'll just say no observers, right? No observers. Maybe we can just say no observers to notify. And get update. So when an observer is interested to get the get the update from the subject, then we can call this method get update. Post update. So whatever we wanted to post, right? So let's actually post something. Before that, let's print some message on the console. So I can say message posted from subject. This is the message posted. And we'll actually assign it to the message of the data member, right? And finally, we wanted to notify all the observers about this update. So we have the post message, which has the message. So what we'll do in this method is we'll just call the notify observers method so that this method gets invoked. And if it is not empty, then using this loop, we are going to update all the observers with the message, right? So this completes the implementation of subject interface. Now let's actually define another class to implement observer interface. I'll call my class as observer implementation, and then we'll start implementing the methods. So first we need to implement the observer, right? So observer, we wanted to implement all the methods in the observer interface. And before that, we wanted to have two data members, right? For observer as well. So observer name and a subject registered. All right. Now let's define the methods in the observer interface. So update is used to actually call the get update from the subject and get the latest update from it. So what we'll do here is we'll just call the subject register dot get update method from the subject, which actually returns an object. So we know that this will be a message which is of string type, right? So let's capture this in message. So I'll call this as new message. And we can see here get update is of object type, right? So we need to typecast it to string object. Let's do that. We have the update now. And what if this message, we don't have any message, right? So we need to handle this case as well, right? So let's handle that case. If it is not null, only then we'll actually say we have the new message for the observer. We'll actually display the observer name. Okay, to display the observer name, so let's actually have a constructor defined here. Observer implementation. String observer name. We'll have the observer name initialized using this constructor, right? And then we have the update method. So which actually where we actually calling the get update from the subject class, and then we are typecasting it as it is an object type. We are typecasting it to the string. We have the new message. If it is not null, we'll just display the observer name and we'll just say some message like this is the message. We'll just say new message received and the message what it is. It is a new message, right? This completes the update method. Now we have another method update, which actually takes the parameter string, which will be used by the subject to actually notify all the observers. So just notice the difference here. So there is an update method here, which doesn't take any parameter, which will be called by the observer specifically if it wants to get an update from the subject. And this method update, another update method, which has a parameter string, will be called by the actual subject to notify the observers. And we can actually use the same message here. So same code, we can when and subject actually calls the observers update method with the message. So we'll just check for it. If it is not null, we are going to actually print the message. And we'll also write some message here. What if it is null, right? If it is null, we'll just say no message received. So this is completes the update message, update method, which will be called by the subject to update the observers, right? And set subject is a method where we will actually associate the subject to this observer. And for this, we just need to assign subject registered with the subject. So this completes the implementation of observer class as well, which is actually implementing the observer interface, right? So this completes the entire design pattern. Now we wanted to test this pattern. So for that, let me create a new class. I'll call my class as observer design pattern test. As we wanted to start the execution from this class, let's have main method defined first, and then here we'll have the subject. I'll call my subject as implementing the subject. Right, and then we'll have the list of observers. This has to be big uppercase O. We'll have observers list where we'll have an initial size of 5 for the array list, right? And then we'll actually initialize all these observers. So we wanted to give name to these observers, right? So let's actually do that. And for that, we are going to use observers dot add new of observer implementation class. So this actually invokes the constructor which we defined in the observer implementation class, where we'll name our observer just with the index. With this, what we are doing, we are actually creating, like it runs for 5 times, right, this loop. So we are going to create 5 observers, and this added to this observer list, right? And remember, we didn't register the observer set to the subject. Let's do that now. For all the observers, or for each observer, right? For each observer from the list, this is the list. What we wanted to do, we wanted to register to the subject dot register the observer, and also we'll call the observer method set subject to set this subject to the observer, right? Observer dot, we have set subject to set the subject as well. So it is simple. We just, with this loop, we actually added the observers, and with the second loop for loop, right, we are actually registering the observer to the subject, as well as we are setting the subject to the observer as well. Now let's actually test this using observers dot, it's a list, right? So we can call any of the 5 observers, so which are indexed with 0 to 4. So I'll just use 0 as the index, and we'll try to get the update from the subject. Note that we don't have any message yet, but still we are actually calling the update method. And what we'll do is we'll also call the subject. We'll use the subject object and post the message. We'll just have some message here. This is observer design pattern test posted by myself, right? So what should this do? we are posting from the subject, we are calling the post message. This should actually notify all the observers which are registered. Let us verify that by executing this program now. And we can clearly see here observer 1. So no message received. This is coming from this update method. So this call actually what it did, it actually called the update method as there is no new message. So it just said no message received for the observer 1, right? Then we actually called post message, right? So you can see here post message actually has the definition of, you can see we had some message printed here, message posted. This has to be from subject and the message, actual message, right? So you can see that here. And finally it has to actually notify the observers. So it actually notified the observers. That's the reason we can see here all the observers got notified about the update. 5 observers got notified about the update. So this is how we can actually implement the observer design pattern. You can actually try out other methods for unregister as well, right? So this is all about observer design pattern. And coming to the real life use cases of this pattern, right? So it is used in GUI toolkits and event listeners in Java. So if you take the button and event on click listeners, right? So they are modeled using the observer design pattern, where button is considered as the subject and on click listeners, right? So they are considered as the observers. Other examples could be, you know, social media, RSS feeds, and email subscription, where you're given a choice to actually subscribe for the updates, right? So that those are the real life use cases. And if you download an app from the Play Store, right? So all the users who actually download the app get the notification about the update from the Play Store. So this is also another example for the where like observer design pattern has been used. So these are all the real life use cases. So in this video, we started with learning what the intent of observer design pattern is, what's the layman approach, what's the best approach, that is how to, and then we saw the architecture of the design pattern, observer design pattern, and we have seen an example on that. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching.